What's up, everyone? This is Raphael Garcia here with Schwann Humes for episode 141 of the MMA Ratings Podcast. We have a couple of different topics to talk about today. But before we jump into it, just wanted to say, Schwann, how you doing there, sir? Let everyone know how you are.
Not bad, man. I'm busy as always. The temperature is getting schizophrenic down here. One day it's good 80, next minute it's 40 degrees. The following day it's 97, then it's 30 degrees. So
Yeah, it's,
every,
it's been pretty consistent around 40 over here, 40 to 50
that's the
to
problem
60
with Texas.
sometimes.
People always talk about the heat, but I'm like, the heat you get used to when it's just hot. The problem is when you have these 60 and 50-degree swings in the temperature throughout the day, that's when it gets really hard to deal with.
True, true. How's the family coping? Hope the girls stay.
They're
No
good.
one's got sick yet, right?
When you got kids and they're on teenagers and other kids, they stay sick. My youngest has got to stay home again, second time this week because she got sick at school. So I'm like, ugh, it's killing me. I take her to work with me on Tuesday. That was fun. And now
Yeah, I bet it
she
was.
came home early today, and I was going to be off tomorrow. So it has been nothing but a cavalcade of fun over here.
Yeah,
Good
that doesn't
luck.
sound fun at all, sir. But what is fun is talking about mixed martial arts. And we got quite a bit of things to talk about today. We're going to recap UFC 244, talk about that big show and a couple of different angles coming out of that. We're going to look forward to UFC Moscow and Bellator 233 this weekend, and also look back at Canelo versus Kovalev, which was on this past weekend. We got a viewer question about that. So let's go ahead and start off with UFC 244, where we have Jorge Masvidal taking home the BMF title, and he did so via TKO by a doctor stoppage after the third round due to a nasty cut that was over Nate Diaz's right eye, I believe. And we know the story here. There's been a lot of conversation about whether or not this stoppage was valid. You have a lot of people that are that the doctor who called the stoppage was even getting death threats. He posted that on social media this week, and I think he did an interview about that too. A lot of people were upset, but for the most part, most of the individuals who are professionals within the sport, like from a media standpoint, and other officials say that it was a valid stoppage. If you've seen the pictures of the two cuts that Diaz had over his eyes, it was pretty bad. It was one was in the same spot that he had against Anthony Pettis at UFC 239. And there's a lot of different angles being posed when talking about this situation here. Some are saying that the stoppage was not good, that they should run it back. Others are saying that the stoppage was valid. I don't see that there's a point for a rematch right at this time. I think it just does. It's just doing too much for what was a very fun moment. I will say that it wasn't an ideal way for that fight to end. It wasn't an ideal way at all, but it is not illegitimate in any way, shape, or form. I think it was a clean stoppage from what we've seen with that cut and how nasty it could be. I don't think there's any reason to question the doctor in this situation. Schwann, what are some of your thoughts about how this fight ended on Saturday?
Well, in a certain way, I feel like the fight was a good ending just because it wasn't conclusive. You always want a conclusive ending, especially when it's for a title called the baddest MF in the world or whatever, BMF title. But in a certain instance, the way it ended allowed everybody to kind of save face. Jorge Masvidal got to show that there's levels between him and Nate Diaz as far as their skill set and how they've evolved over their time in mixed martial arts. Nate Diaz got to show that he still has his chin, he still has his heart, he still has that warrior spirit, and he didn't get forced in a position where he had to tap out or a position where he got knocked out. So even though it was conclusive, even though it was conclusive, we can make strong conclusions about how the fight was going. It didn't really end in a manner that kind of took away from either one, because Nate Diaz gets knocked out cold, and that kind of takes away some of his momentum and his rep is this dude who can't be stopped, this dude who's a really bad dude, a dude who's just a warrior in there. I mean, everybody respects a guy who get knocked out, but it's hard to hear a guy talk super tough when they just got knocked clean out. With the cut, it can still be a matter of he has his, I was about to come on, the doctor stop it, they're playing a game with me, they're manipulating me. It kind of goes back to the whole brand that he sells, which is if this is a street fight, you don't stop street fights until they're over. And I was going to make my comeback late and make it into a war. So he doesn't lose anything from this. It shows that a little limited in his skill set, but we've all known that. We've known that Nate Diaz is limited in his skill set for years, but it didn't put him in a position where his heart or durability is still questioned. He's still considered a dude who's only been stopped once, and a guy who's willing to walk through all sorts of punishment to do some work or to be effective in a fight. So to that point, I kind of disagree with you because this way, like I said, Jorge shows he's a world class guy and he's levels above Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz still shows that he's got world class heart, world class grit, world class chin, even though we know he doesn't have world class skills necessarily, and he gets to walk away and push his storyline and still be true to his brand.
So you said something about the cut making the fight or making the stoppage questionable or something along. I'm not exactly sure the exact word you used there, but I don't know if I agree with that because from a rule standpoint, stoppages are, I mean, cut stoppages are a way to win a fight. That's why a lot of fighters use slashing elbows to open up cuts on their opponent. Yeah, Nate or anyone else who's lost a fight along this way may be able to say, oh well, it's not legitimate. I just got cut, etc., etc. But that's an actual strategy, ground and pound, leading to nasty cuts like that. That's why you see a lot of people use those types of elbows. It's no different than someone getting caught with a submission. Oh, that he really didn't do anything. He just caught me with that heel hook, or he just caught me with that arm bar, etc., etc. I was winning the fight. I think that's just something that people throw out there, but this is still well within the rules for a path to victory for a fighter, regardless of whether we agree with it or not. And then on the other side of that, people talk about the fourth and fifth round with Nate Diaz as if he was coming on. I don't think he really was. We've never actually seen. I think there's only the only fight in recent memory that we could talk about where he fought in the fourth and fifth round was against Conor McGregor, and yeah, he looked better then. But I think it's a stretch to say he was coming on in this fight here. He was definitely losing this contest, and I think that if the fight would have continued, he would have lost every single round.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is like even though the legitimacy of it, I understand it's a legitimate way of stopping it. Only thing I'm saying is it doesn't hurt his brand. He still can say the things he says as far as conspiracy against him, nobody likes him, the doctors against him, UFC's against him. Then he can still talk with a certain swagger and a certain aggression because he wasn't finished. When it was kind of like when Conor McGregor got beat by Nate Diaz and he got tapped out. And afterwards, Conor was talking about how he almost had him and he's going to punish him. It's really hard to take that seriously when you were finished. It kind of takes away a little bit off the edge off of your brand when you've been finished like that. Since Nate wasn't necessarily finished, he can still say, I wouldn't have stopped. I was nowhere near quitting. I was about to come on. And when you looked at his over his career, that's how he's won the majority of his fights. Second half of the first round, second round, third round, fourth round, fifth round. He's always come on late. So he can still draw people because his fan base is going to buy into it. Casuals are going to buy into it. So it still makes him a viable star and a viable opponent for anybody else who's trying to get a name fight where they can make some money and get some crossover appeal. He hasn't lost anything. Once again, before the fight, I said skill wise, this isn't even close. Jorge's better in almost every single area, but the matter is going to be conditioning and heart. And you still can't question Nate's conditioning to a certain degree. You still can't question his heart, and that's what he's selling people. He's not selling that he's the most skilled fighter. This isn't the MSF title. This is the BMF. It's not about the most skilled, the most technical guy. It's supposed to be for the toughest guy, and he can still talk that talk as a tough guy because he didn't tap out, he didn't give up, and he didn't look for a way out. In fact, after losing, he's still running his mouth talking stuff, saying he wants more of it. Now, do we think he's technically capable of winning the fight? I don't know. It didn't look like it. But as far as the spirit and the mindset, thinking that he could find some way to win, then yeah, you buy into it. So it just doesn't hurt the bottom. It doesn't hurt his bottom line. It doesn't hurt his image. It doesn't hurt his brand. And as a result, it doesn't hurt the level of the fight because the whole time he was still fighting back. It wasn't competitive. It wasn't super technical. He didn't really have any answers, but he was still engaging. He was still fighting. And that's what's going to help the UFC if they choose to market him further. And that's what's going to help him as he promotes himself further because nobody just outright beat him into submission or knocked him out. He can still talk the talk that he always likes to talk about, being tough and being a guy who everybody should fear and everybody should run away from him.
So you mentioned what's next for these guys. Diaz has been tweeting lately that he's going to retire and walk away from the sport. I mean, I look at that as, I kind of shrugged and was like, well, next. I just kind of scrolled by it like it didn't really matter because we've heard the Diaz brothers go back and forth talking about this type of situation before. I wonder what his payout was for this event. I haven't seen anything yet, but I think that would be a good understanding of how long he may be away from the sport. Do I think he walks away for a little while? Yeah. I think it's another year before we see him fight or so based on this situation. Let's talk about that first before we move on to what's next for Masvidal. What did you think about Diaz's kind of response on social media saying, "Do you think he's really gone?"
I mean, he's one of the few guys who's actually had an issue with the UFC and actually taken time off. And once again, it comes off of career high paydays because of the interest he's generated because of his brand and how he is and who he is, and taking advantage of the moment. He's put himself in a position where he can literally say, "I'm not going to fight," and not have any financial reason to get back in there. They can't bully Nate Diaz with paychecks. They can't bully him with paydays. He's in three of his fights, he's made more than some guys have made in their entire careers. Some guys who fought 10, 15 times in the UFC have not made what Nate Diaz has made in three fights. Two with Conor McGregor, one with Jorge Masvidal, and even though he didn't make as much money for Anthony Pettis, I guarantee you he was one of the top 3 or 4 paid people in the fight with Anthony Pettis too. So he's in a position where he doesn't have to do that. In fact, taking a break and giving the middle finger to the UFC actually helps his brand. They're not giving me what I want. I don't believe I was finished. I don't believe I was done. They're sabotaging me. I'm not playing the game like the rest of these clowns. Middle finger up, I'm out. That just helps his brand. That helps him sell. He has no real reason to play ball with the UFC. It's going to cost him money to be a company man. To continue the behavior he has had in the past 2 to 3 years, it makes him money. It makes him money every single day. He tells the UFC, "I'm not doing what you want, so you give me what I want." It makes him money. He has no reason to come back. There's not a lot of money fights, except for maybe Conor. I mean, there's big fights, but it's big UFC fights. It's not big event fights. It's not the kind of fights that Rock will come out to see. So he's got no reason to come back to UFC unless he just wants to. And that was never his goal. He wants to make as much money as possible and be in the biggest fights possible. Neither one of those things is an option right now. Jorge's not fighting him next. And unless Conor comes back, there's no other real, legitimate big time fight out there for him to get involved in.
Do you think we see him fight again, or is that it, or are we not going to see him fight again? If you had to pick one, what
think
would
he'll
you
fight
pick?
again. I think he'll fight again at least once or twice, I think.
Okay, all right. So let's move on to Masvidal then. So he picked up what was probably the most important win of his career. He is ranked, I think, number 3 in the lightweight division now. What do you see next for him? Does he face the winner of UFC 245, that lightweight or that welterweight title fight between Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington, or does he pick a fight with Conor McGregor, maybe get that situation? If you were in charge with him, what would you tell him to do? What direction would you go with him?
It really depends. I don't know if he's about legacy, then he goes for the title, because if he wins the title, he could somehow talk the UFC into giving Conor McGregor a title shot at welterweight. I think the UFC would be willing to make that happen. If he wanted it and Conor wanted it, I think the UFC would make that happen. And like I said, Jorge's not a big lightweight. Welterweight. He moved from lightweight, so he's not super huge. So it's a feasible fight. Conor's fought at welterweight before. If he gets the title and he fights Conor McGregor, how big is that fight? Conor has a chance to win a title in the third weight class against a guy who's not only the BMF but also the welterweight champion. That's something that you could really sell. I mean, at this point, he's not going to have any more leverage than he has right now. He has 2 highlight reel knockout wins, and then he has his fight of the night, one-sided beating over Nate Diaz. So he's got all this momentum. He's got all this popularity. Personally, I think he's going to sit out and wait for the belt. I think Conor McGregor is appealing to him, but he seems to really want the belt. He seems to really want to separate himself and establish himself as a all-time great, or at least a guy who's in the conversation for being an all-time great. And the BMF title, I don't think is going to do that, but winning a world championship will. So I really think he's going to hold out for the title. I don't know when Conor's fighting. I don't know anything about Conor fighting. So I can't imagine him building his whole schedule and his whole career around a guy who's been talking about fighting for 2 years but hasn't come anywhere near signing a contract, and who nobody has any idea when he's coming back or who he's coming back again.
True. He's supposed to be coming back on the 18th, but no one, and there's supposed to be an announcement coming up, but The UFC has yet to kind of confirm or deny anything. So I'm waiting, just like everybody else, to see what the hell that situation is about, if it's a real deal.
All I know right now is Jorge needs to be very careful how he plays these next couple decisions because, as I said before, he's been in this. He's a veteran. He's been in for years. What, 10, 11 years fighting, maybe more. This is the first time he's had leverage. This is the first time he's been what you can consider a star. It's the first time he's been on top of the mountain and he's had some influence and ability to dictate shots and get massive paydays. He can't afford to mishandle this. Then whatever decision he makes, his next decision is the most important decision. Because not only did he have two legitimate quality wins over ranked guys who were currently threats in the UFC, he has a in the fight over Diaz. Diaz isn't really a ranked fighter in the welterweight division or really the lightweight division at this point. He's a name fighter, and he beat the name, and he's picked up all the momentum that's come with that, adding it to his own. So whatever decision he makes now is very important because he won't ever outside of winning the title, he will never have this much power and this much momentum behind him again.
So, okay, I think I agree with you there, and I do believe that playing the situation out really is important at this point in time because we've seen how quickly power can go from the UFC back to the fighter and inverse from the fighters to the UFC. Is this the biggest win of Masvidal's career, and can he top this win, even if he was going to become the champion? Do you think this is the moment that we look back and I say this is the most important win of his entire career?
It's the biggest win as far as crossover appeal and mainstream appeal. It's the biggest win because it's over a mainstream star. It's a fight that not only was it's a fight that not only was important, I guess, to say in the mixed martial arts. It's important to casuals. It's important to everybody. I mean, this fight basically carried the card, and it's not a fight between two highly ranked welterweights. It's a fight between one highly ranked welterweight and one guy who honestly shouldn't even be in the top 15. It's the most important fight because it's broke him free and really introduced him to the mainstream. Like everybody knew who Nate Diaz was before. Once he fought Conor McGregor, everybody knew who Nate Diaz was. People knew who Jorge Masvidal was before, but once he fought Nate Diaz in the buildup, even though it wasn't as contentious as the Nate Diaz Conor McGregor buildup was, they got to tell his story. He's getting all these specials done on him. He's on all these mainstream TV shows. People are getting to find out about the man, his thoughts on things, his political positions, his history growing up. He's getting all sorts of attention he never would have got fighting a top name in mixed martial arts. So now this is important because it's important for his career and his brand. It's established him in a way that beating Dustin Poirier, Khabib, Nurmagomedov would never establish him. The only other fighter that he could beat that would give him any sort of run like this would have been Conor McGregor. So as far as how it benefits his brand and his mass appeal, this is the most important fight of his career. As far as beating a legitimate opponent who has a skill set and is currently competing and will move you up in the rankings, beating Nate Diaz didn't do anything for him. It just gave him more popularity, more attention. As far as quality fights rankings, beating Ben Askren was probably the most important fight in his career.
Good thoughts there, sir. Good thoughts. Let's move on to the next fighter I would like to talk about, and that's Mr. Darren Till, who picked up another big win, he picked up an important win over Kelvin Gastelum, taking was it a split decision? Was this the one that had like the shoddy judging? But he
Yeah,
picked
I
up
think somebody gave it like 30-27 Gastelum.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting there. But he picked up a decision win over Kelvin Gastelum. And my first thought in watching this fight is this more an indictment on Gastelum and looking back to the Israel Adesanya fight and maybe wondering how much did that fight take out of him, or is this the real Darren Till? What are your thoughts about that? There is this more about what that Adesanya fight took out of Kelvin, and are we going to begin seeing a downward slide for him, or is this the Darren Till that we all thought we would see?
I didn't really think I'd see it because my question hasn't been with Darren Till's physical tools, and it hasn't necessarily been with his skill set. It's been issues with his strategy, his preparation, and his professionalism. I still don't know if these questions have been answered because he faced a guy who wasn't really pushing him. I mean, Gastelum didn't force a pace. He wasn't willing to walk through shots to get his own shots off. he only really attacked one way, and he didn't really seem to have any energy. So Till got an important win and a high level win because of where Gastelum was ranked. But I mean, what did Kelvin show you in that fight that answered any of the questions we have about Till? I don't know if Till's chin is still good. Gastelum didn't really test it. I don't know if Till's poise and maturity is still there, has been developed, because Gastelum didn't put him in a position where he had to show poise and maturity. I don't know how his cardio holds up because Gastelum didn't challenge him in any area to test his cardio or his durability. So I have the same questions about Till that I had prior to the win. Only thing this does is tell me a lot about Kevin Gastelum, that he may have already hit his ceiling. That little run he made to the middleweight title, which, as I've said repeatedly, was one of the weakest runs to a title shot in the history of mixed martial arts. Um, might have just exposed him. This might be all he is at this point. A tough guy who can fight in spots, who's got some athleticism and can fight in spots, but is incapable of beating elite talent. Now, matched up with the right elite talent in the right matchups, he can be effective. He can be maybe devastating, but when matched up outside of that, he doesn't have much to offer. That's what it's starting to look like with Kelvin Gastelum. As far as Darren Till, I don't know what Darren Till has because he wasn't tested. In my opinion, he wasn't tested in any form or fashion.
So you don't think Darren Till was tested here? What is his ceiling as a middleweight? Do you think that he's someone that can maybe oppose a Israel Adesanya, or is this more of an indictment or indictment of Gastelum not being an elite fighter, quote unquote?
Uh, I mean, he's young, so there's always a chance of him taking huge steps forwards as far as his technique and his the structure and how he fights. Not just having random techniques you can do, but knowing how to build your techniques from the A to Z instead of just having these random letters put together and depending on your physical attributes to dictate. But throughout what I've seen of Darren Till, he hasn't shown a lot. He's not a very high volume fighter. He's not a very high pace fighter. He hasn't shown outstanding wrestling or outstanding grappling. He hasn't really shown outstanding striking, to be honest. He's shown he's shown fairly one dimensional, low output, high impact striking, and he hasn't really shown any depth of skill. It's been any fight that's been exciting has been because of a lack of skill he has, and any fight that's been boring has been due to a lack of skill he has. I really don't know much about Darren Till except that he's big, strong, long, and durable, and he likes to strike. Outside of that, I really don't know how good a grappler is. I don't know how good a wrestler he is. I don't know what he does under duress because he hasn't shown anything, because he hasn't really been under duress. Even in the fights have been competitive. It's been against guys who aren't high caliber athletes and aren't high caliber fighters. Being in a bad spot against a guy who you're physically superior than or class better than isn't the same as being in a bad spot against a guy who's your equal or your superior. So while he has the potential, just because he's young, he's tough, and he still has room to grow. Nothing he's shown me says he's elite. And this is coming from a guy who picked him over Woodley. I just thought he'd have a better game plan, and he didn't. And since then, I haven't seen anything that tells me that this is the guy who's going to be a future champion or a dominant fighter in any division. Beating Kelvin Gastelum hasn't told me that at all.
Okay, all right. I want to move on from that fight because actually no. Before we do that, let's talk about another aspect of what's going on with Darren Till, because it seems like he's goading Yoel Romero into a fight, and this is something that's interesting to me because he said he's been very candid about being almost faking an injury before the walkout at UFC 244, and he also said that he wouldn't want to fight somebody like Yoel Romero, et cetera, et cetera. But it seems like they are heading on a path to face off against each other, especially with Adesanya not having a true contender now because of Paulo Costa having the bicep surgery. What are your thoughts about a fight between Darren Till and Yoel Romero? What are some of your initial thoughts about them two getting into the cage together?
I just don't think it's a good matchup for Till. Till's not really good defensively. He seems fairly good offensively, but he's not very slick. He's not very technical. He gets by on being the fact that he can take a good shot, he gives a good shot, and he's long. Joe Romero is not a technically good striker, but he's very clever. He knows how to break rhythm. He knows how to cover distance. He knows how to maintain distance. He's got a lot of instinctive, natural fighting instincts that allow him to navigate the holes he has in his skill set and his skills technically. And then you place the fact that he's a world class athlete with a world class chin. Those little tricks he does go from minor nuisances from a lower caliber athlete to a fight changing or fight ending technique from a guy with Yoel Romero's skill set. So I just don't think it's a good matchup. I don't think Till's got a good enough defensive wrestling or grappling to keep Yoel Romero off of if he wants the fight to go there. And I know Till's not defensively slick enough, nor does he have the defensive instincts to stay away from the shots that Yoel Romero can put together. I really just think it's a bad matchup. It'll be exciting while it lasts, but I can't imagine Till beating Yoel Romero unless Yoel Romero falls off a cliff athletically, or if that's pretty much it. I mean, Yoel Romero's fought the better opposition. He's gone more rounds against world class opposition. He's stopped better people. He's beaten better people. He's won in more impressive ways. It's really hard to find some spot where Darren Till has any logical stance where he can beat Yoel Romero outside of him being a kickboxer, and you can say, oh, he could outbeat him on the feet. But who is Darren Till really looked impressive against on the feet? Who has he ever just really outclassed? Where you're like, wow, man, this guy's dangerous. I don't want to stand with him. I've never seen that fight from Darren Till.
Yeah, like that. Looking at the type of damage that Yoel Romero has done to fighters, even what he did to Paulo Costa, I just don't think that that's the type of fight that Darren Till would really be able to survive. I think it is definitely a dangerous aspect, and we haven't even talked about Yoel's wrestling, where he can control that fight where it's positioned at any point in time. His wrestling's totally different than what we saw Darren Till be able to overcome from Kelvin Gastelum. It's totally different, and I don't think he keeps himself upright long enough to be able to do a
Even
whole
if he can
bunch of
defend
damage
him,
there.
once he starts defending or looking for the takedown, that opens up the striking because everybody knows once you're focused on staying on your feet, you give up a certain defensive responsibility and ability to counter because now you're afraid of if I counter too hard, I load up on the shot and I counter, he's gonna hit a reactive takedown. If I come forward too much, he's gonna get a reactive takedown. If he
Hmm.
starts throwing and puts me up against the fence, is he gonna use that as a transition into a clinch or into a shot? So once you have that fear, you're striking half your striking game goes out the window, and Darren Till's striking game isn't deep enough or technical enough for half of it to go out the window, especially not the defensive half. So like I said, you can always win a fight. I mean, there's ways you can win it, but when you look at it on paper and look at what they've done and the results they've done against durable, competent opposition, it's not even close. They fought two classes of opponents, they've beaten two classes of opponents, and they've done so in much different manners. Till's eked by some, when Romero's won, he's won fairly decisively, even against the best people he's fought, with the exception of Robert Whitaker.
Hmm. Let's move on to another big fight where Stephen Thompson got a pretty clear win over Vicente Luque. And looking at this fight, I was wondering, I'm like, man, is this another one where this is more of an indictment on Luque and where he stands in the division, or are we seeing a reemergence in Stephen Thompson? Is he just back to that Stephen Thompson that was setting the lightweight, or excuse goodness, I keep doing that, setting the welterweight division on fire? What do we see here, and what do we make out of this big win?
Well, my biggest thing with it is I don't think we saw anything new from Stephen Thompson. I mean, Stephen Thompson hasn't really changed what he does, nor has he shown a lot of variation in what he does since pretty much the day he's gotten in here. His defensive grappling's gotten a little better. His ability to defend takedowns has gotten a little better. Maybe his hands have gotten a little sharper. But as far as actually him changing his style or making adjustments in the strategy he takes in fighting, it hasn't changed. Stephen Thompson is essentially fighting the same way he's always fought, with the same general holes and the same general strengths in his skill set. He's able to manage distance. He's able to control distance with that side kick, with that lead leg. It allows him to control distance, disrupt guys' rhythm, and stay out of range where guys can't clinch him up or get him in the pocket where he's weak. He's still fairly weak in the pocket. His punches, he can throw individual punches. He doesn't throw combinations very well. And defensively, outside of controlling distance and using his lead leg and feints to control guys, he's not really hard to hit if you can get him. If you can put your shots together, you can stay in front of him. That's always been the story on him. So I think the issue is Luque lacked the footwork and he lacked the depth of skills necessary to get to the spots he needed to get to against Wonderboy. Early on, he got to him. He was countering him, getting to his body a little bit, getting landing fairly clean. But once Thompson established the range and used that lead leg and that long lead hand to control the range, Luque didn't have. He ran out of ideas. He didn't know how to cut an angle to get on the inside. When he got inside, he didn't do anything and allowed Thompson to reset the distance and then beat him up all the way till he got to the spot he wanted. By the time he got to the spot he wanted, he didn't have anything left. So I can't I can't say that Wonder Boy showed me anything dynamic or new. All he did was he faced a guy who I thought his athleticism would be enough, but he didn't have the finer skills necessary to put Wonder Boy in the positions he needed to be to lose. And Luque wasn't able to fight off the back foot to draw Wonder Boy in to land counters like Tyron Woodley did. He just kind of chased him and pressured him. He tried to pressure him, but he wasn't pressuring him. He was just chasing him. So while he's chasing Wonder Boy's chopping him away, beating him up, and then Wonder Boy starts pushing him back. And once he's on his back foot, being pushed back, he had no answers for Wonder Boy. His best shot was to come out early, put something on him, and put him away. He didn't do that. Wonder Boy made an adjustment, and then Wonder Boy just ran away with the fight because Luque had no idea how to manage distance, how to close distance, or how to stay in distance once he got the distance he wanted.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about Kevin Lee and Corey Anderson. These two individuals picked up some huge wins on Saturday, defeating two men that they were the underdog to. Kevin Lee defeated Gregor Gillespie, and Corey Anderson defeated Johnny Walker. Both of them were stoppages within 3 minutes. I think Johnny Walker got finished in like a minute and 45, and Gregor Gillespie got finished, I think, within like the 2:45, 2:47 mark. I want to compare these two guys. Which individual needed this type of win more, Kevin Lee or Corey Anderson?
Kevin Lee needed the win. Kevin Lee hasn't proven that he's legitimately world class. He had this whole win streak built off of favorable matchups with guys who weren't as good of athletes as he was and weren't the caliber fighter he was. Every time he'd faced anybody who was elite or near elite, he's gotten summarily defeated pretty obviously. Iaquinta beat him the two times. Ferguson beat him. Rafael Desanio beat him, and I want to say they all finished him. So he needed to show that he could beat a guy who was his athletic equal or superior, a guy who had shown himself to be closing in on elite, if not elite. He had to show that he could beat that guy and not beat him as a front runner, but be in a bad spot and show ability to make an adjustment and turn a fight around. He'd never done that. Corey Anderson has been beaten before and shown that he can be consistent and shown that he can consistently perform against an ascending level of difficulty in opponents. Kevin Lee has never done that. As soon as he got to a certain caliber, he gets knocked right down. Corey Anderson has been consistently working his way up, knocking off guys who outclassed him in athleticism, outclassed him in striking, maybe were comparable in wrestling. He's shown the growth, he's shown the development. Kevin Lee hadn't shown any of that. So Kevin Lee needed to show that when he gets put in a bad spot, when a fight gets tough, he's not going to front run and quit. He's going to make an adjustment and win. And that's what Sahabi did for him. He didn't necessarily add skills. He made the skills connected, so it's not just individual kicks and punches thrown together all hodgepodge. There was a structure. He had an actual answer to what Gillespie was doing. And secondly, and most importantly, Zahabi is big on maintaining control, maintaining poise, and fighting in a mature, responsible manner. And for once in his life, when put in a tough spot, Kevin Lee didn't force takedowns or just get involved in a mindless exchange. He actually had a goal he was trying to reach and worked from A to B to C to D to get to E to finish the fight. So Kevin Lee needed this fight. His resume and his performances show that he hasn't been the caliber of guy to win when he's needed to win in the toughest spot.
So I wrote a piece about this, about how Kevin Lee may be taking a path dangerously traveled back to the title picture because, he called out Islam Makhachev for as his next to fight. And Islam is another one of those guys that nobody wants to fight. He's one of these Dagestani competitors that are just like hell to try to deal with. If you look at the rest of the division, I think Kevin Lee was ranked number 11 when I wrote that piece, and Makhachev was number 15. I'm sure there's been some adjustments since. No one above 5'6" has any reason to fight Kevin Lee, so he has to turn and look behind him and beat some of the up and comers to push himself back up the ladder at the same time. Do you think we're ever going to be in a place where Kevin Lee is challenging for a title, not being an interim title or anything like that, but where he's done enough and knocked off enough up and comers that he can maybe get a favorable matchup against someone ranked highly to get to the title picture?
I don't think there's any favorable matchups anymore. When you lose the way he's lost, you're gonna have to consistently show people that you're not gonna fold and you're not gonna make mental errors winning a tough fight. Kevin Lee is gonna have to win, in my estimate, he's gonna have to win at least 3 fights before he can be legitimately considered a fighter in position to be elite. And you have to ask that question because the nature of his losses. Personally, I don't think lightweight's the best weight for him. I think he likes to stay there because of the weight advantage and strength advantage he has. I don't know that the cut's in his best interest. If he feels he can make it and Zahabi thinks he can, then I guess it's fine. I don't necessarily think it's in his best interest though. But he's a long way off from the title fight. I mean, he's lost his last two. Prior to this, he was what? This he's
I
one.
think two and
He's one.
three.
Yeah, 2-3, and he hasn't shown any ability to beat anybody anywhere near the league contender status. He's looked good in spots, but as soon as the fight makes an adjustment, he collapses. He collapsed against Iaquinta. He collapsed against Tony Ferguson. He collapsed against Rafael dos Anjos. The simple fact of the matter is he needs more time with Zahabi to really lock in and execute the system he wants. You don't just pick. You might pick up some things, but you're not just going to pick those things up in one fight. It's going to take 1 fight, 2 fight, 3 fights for you to master it and perfect it, so that any situation you're put into, you're responding the way he wants you to, or you're attacking in the way he wants you to, so you're not in those situations. I don't think Kevin Lee should be in any rush to get to a title fight, and I don't think anybody in the UFC is going to be pushing him towards a title fight. He needs time to develop what he's doing and make sure that when he gets his next shot, he can make the most of it. I mean, all Kevin Lee needs to do is fight yet another elite guy and then get beaten again. I mean, let's face it, he's lost 2 of his last 3. This is his first win, and he'd have to win at least another fight just to be 500 in his last 4 fights. And
Mm-hmm.
just to get over it, he needs to win at least 2 more. So I mean, as much as excited as I am and as impressive as this is, let's not get away from the fact that Kevin Lee has looked spectacular before. And then once you start raising the level of opposition, he tends to look less and less spectacular.
So Corey Anderson is an interesting situation where he is basically. I don't think he's going to be one. He's going to have to do something to get a title shot. You hear the way Dana White talks about him, and he doesn't necessarily have too many good things to say about Corey. He has some good things to say, kind of good things to say about what he did on Saturday, basically saying that that kind of that got everybody's attention, but I think he's far off from even ever being in a title situation here. He'd have to be in a situation where Dominic Reyes gets hurt last minute and he's willing to step in. But what do you think this fight did for Corey Anderson? Is he someone that can gain that kind of trust and get a title shot out of this bout, or is he just going to be the perpetual contender, the 205 version of John Fitch?
I just think well, John Fitch got a title fight. He just didn't get another one because he didn't win the one he
He did.
got.
Correct.
It's like the Bernard Hopkins thing. When you're a guy who nobody wants to fight, and you're a guy who's got to win 6 fights for every 2 fights somebody else wins, then the fact of the matter is, eventually, if you keep winning, you are going to get your title fight. You're going to force their hand where you're going to have beaten enough guys where they've got to do something to get rid of you, either get you a title shot or they're going to have to release you because you're knocking off too many young contenders. The question is, when you get your title shot, when you get your opportunity, will you be able to make the most of it? That's the problem. Bernard Hopkins, when he finally got his shot, he made sure he won. John Fitch, when he finally got his shot, he did not win. And because he's not an interesting champion, he's not charismatic, he doesn't really have an angle to push or looks or charm to sell, he was never in position to fight for a title again because of that. They didn't like him, and they weren't forced to deal with him because they didn't win. Tyron Woodley would have been in that situation had he not won the title against Robbie Lawler. They didn't want him to win. They didn't want him to win at all, but he won it, and he defended it, and they were forced to deal with Tyron Woodley. Damian Maia was a guy they didn't want to win titles because he's not exciting. He's Brazilian. He's not exciting. So they're glad he didn't beat Tyron Woodley. They're glad Anderson Silva beat him. He was never able to win the big fight to put himself in position where they'd have to deal with him. Corey Anderson, as much as they're shortchanging him, all these fights are giving him a chance to get some fan support behind him because he keeps on winning. It legitimizes when he finally gets his title shot. It will legitimize it because he's beaten an ascending level of opponent every single time. He's done so more impressively, and it also makes for a legitimate story because he's beaten so many legitimate guys, and he's done so fairly dominantly. Maybe not dynamically, but he's done so dominantly. The problem is when he gets his shot, he has to win because he's going against the company, which means that if he doesn't win it, he's going all the way. In fact, he might as well just move a weight division because they ain't giving him no opportunity. So I believe he's going to get his title shot. He might not get it right away, but he's going to get his title shot. All he has to do is keep winning. I know that's not what he wants to hear. I know he's felt he's done enough, but tell me what fighter doesn't think they've done enough for a title shot? Who's the fighter who doesn't think they've done enough? They all think they've done enough.
Mm-hmm.
Macy Barber thinks she's done enough. She's got, what, 3 wins in the division, and she thinks she deserves a title shot. Everybody thinks they deserve one. He actually does, and I think he'll get one. He just has to keep on winning, and he has to make sure when he gets that title shot that he actually wins it because he will not get another.
Good thoughts there. Good. Like I actually agree with you there. That he is the type of individual that they won't want to give another title shot going forward. Speaking of title shots, Caitlin Chukagian may be the individual who gets a not next shot at what is her name? Valentina Shevchenko. What did you
Yes.
think about how she performed on Saturday? And is she a threat to Shevchenko's title, or is this a foregone conclusion?
All the things I said about Caitlin Chukagian still stand true. Like somebody's like, I heard the show and you said this about her and that's not, and you were wrong. I was like, I didn't say she couldn't win the fight. I never said she couldn't win the fight. I thought that Maya was bigger, stronger, better athlete, hit harder, and had more avenues to win the fight. I said Caitlin's movement, her variety of strikes, especially her kicks, enabled her to win the fight against anybody if she fights the right fight. But she is terribly inaccurate. Look at her. Look at her stats on the fight. She's Holly Holm inaccurate
Mm-hmm.
with her strikes. She moves around a lot, but she's not great defensively. I've seen girls who aren't great offensive fighters put hands on her. I've seen them take her down before. These are all facts. I like her. She's gutsy. She's tough. She's high activity. She's creative with her strikes, especially her kicks. And she's willing to fight anybody, and she believes that she's the best. How can you not like somebody like that? But the things I'm pointing out about her, just because she won, doesn't make them less true. On the side of Maya, Maya didn't make weight, and I said that. I said if she doesn't make weight, there's a chance she checks out of the fight mentally and she loses. I believe that's what happened. I believe she didn't make weight. She knew she wasn't getting a title shot, and mentally she checked out. And on the second point, I believe her either she doesn't listen to her camp, which is what I've heard from people, or her camp is terrible because they fought Caitlin Chukagian in a way that they in a way that they in a way that made me think that they thought they were fighting Roxy Modafari. She stood in front of her and threw like little flurries or loaded up for big shots and never continuously kicked the legs, never put combinations together, really didn't touch the body, wasn't trying to transition from strikes into takedowns. She just basically walked around after her and let Caitlin Chukagian throw kicks in the air and she ran into them. I mean, that's really the fight. She just stood in front of her, throwing a couple flurries, mostly single loaded up shots, and got picked apart by kicks and punches. She didn't make an adjustment. She didn't take angles. She didn't show any defensive awareness. She didn't go from body to head. She didn't do anything consistently enough to have success by it. She gave Caitlin the fight she wanted. She was not creative. She was not deep in what she did, and she didn't push the pace. And Caitlin made her pay for it. Caitlin outworked her, used her variety of kicks, and used her movement, and essentially outstruck her and outhustled her. It was a terrible fight plan by Maya and a terrible execution. But Caitlyn got the win. I have to give it to her. Even the fight against Jessica Eye, that was a close fight. It could have gone either way. I don't think she's a good matchup for Valentina because the same reason that Holly Holm wasn't a good matchup. They both rely heavily on volume to make up for a lack of accuracy and a lack of power. Neither one of them are big level power strikers. They're not. Holly Holm isn't. Caleb Chukagian is even less so. They use volume to make up for that. They use the constant movement to wear opponents down and pick away at them so that late in the fight they can take over. That's not going to work against Valentina. She is a counter striker. And if you're going to come throwing strikes and throwing punches and coming in like that on her, she's going to find an answer to run you into a shot. What's worse now is she ties people up, uses reactive takedowns, whether it's trips, getting underhooks and suplexing people, body slam people. She's got a variety of takedowns, sweeps, trips that she used to take people down, a variety of strikes that open up into the takedowns, or she's got singular punches and kicks that she runs people into when they come. If Caitlin Shagan's going to stand a distance and have a range kickboxing with Valentina Shevchenko, that's not going to work. Valentina Shevchenko is an actually better striker than her, not just athletically, but technically. If Caitlin's going to try and use volume and angles, that might work in spots, but while that's working, Caitlin's not a big hitter. So while she's landing these shots or getting them blocked, Valentina is downloading her timing, downloading the series and the sequence of shots, and lining up her counters. And what's worse, Valentina is actually used to fighting girls who are 135, 145. And she didn't get bullied by Holly Holm. She didn't really get bullied by anybody except Amanda Nunes, and that was only in spots. She can physically put the fight wherever she wants it to be put at. I know Caitlin trains with guys, but that doesn't hold as much weight in the actual fight. So I don't really see a line of victory for her. I don't think Caitlin hits hard enough. Defensively, I don't know if she's sound enough. I can't say she's a better striker than Valentina. I can't say she's a better athlete. I can't say she's physically stronger or more durable than Valentina. So somebody would have to explain to me where she wins this fight. I mean, I guess you could say she could take it down a submitter, but who has Caitlin Chukagian really ever taken down and really out wrestled? When did she ever really wanted to do that?
And the thing
And
is,
she really
she trains up there with John Danaher and that crew. So she has good grappling, and I think she's a brown belt now, I believe. So
it
she has solid grappling in that
is.
space.
I'm not saying that she doesn't have the actual skill. I don't know that how much confidence she has in her ability to apply it. Because you would think that if you have this skill where you're just this dynamic or this effective in it, you would think at some point you would take advantage of it and force fights in those range. And she doesn't. It seems like more she'd use it when she does take down to score points and to keep from being submitted and to control people more than really attempt submissions. And I've seen much better grapplers and much better wrestlers and much bigger, stronger fighters who've had a really hard time getting Valentina Shevchenko down and keeping Valentina Shevchenko down. I don't know that if Amanda Nunes and Sarah Kaufman can do it, I'm not sure how likely it is that Caitlin Chukagian can do it because she hasn't really shown herself to have physicality or strength, even at this weight class, even at lower weight class. She's still been bullied by girls. She's been bullied by lots of girls. Uh, Jessica I was able to hold her up against Fitch. Jessica I was able to get her off her. And Jessica I isn't the athlete or the striker that Valentina Shevchenko is. I'm not saying this to downplay Shevchenko. I think she's a really good fighter. I just think this isn't a style matchup that fits her. Like I said, there's a chance that she could outwork her and out hustle her because Valentina tends to look for the perfect counter. But the only way that's going to work with you out hustler means you got to throw a lot of volume. And if you're telling me from round 1 to round 5, Valentina is never going to land one clean kick or one clean shot, I don't believe that. I do not believe that.
True, true. All right. So, last thing from UFC 244. Is there anything else on this card that stood out to you that's worth commenting on? There was quite a bit of action that went down. I think we've covered a lot of it, but is there anything else that stood out to you?
I think they should maybe Brad Tavares might need to call it a day, or he might need to go to a smaller league because at this point he's just being used as a name to give guys highlight reel wins. And it's like the last 3 or 4 fights he's had, it's been these devastating losses. And I don't think the UFC is doing any favors. I don't think his camp's doing any favors. And either he's just getting really bad matchups that are costing him, or he's really over the hill and taking a step back and he needs to fight lesser opposition or he needs to stop fighting altogether. Because some of these losses are getting real ugly, really one-sided. It's not even competitive at this stage anymore, which means he just might not have enough to compete at this level anymore.
Good, good, good. So
Well,
let's
one more
talk.
thing.
Go
I
ahead.
feel bad for Roxy Matafari, who has lost like two of her last 3 fights to people who did not make weight. It has got to be frustrating for her to see these people getting in title contention and making money and costing her money when they didn't have the professionalism or dignity to make the weight they need to make. And they don't want to move up because it takes away their physical advantage. So the UFC allows them to fight at these catch weights because fighters need to get paid, and it essentially single-handedly ruined her career. I mean,
Who are you
she's
talking
had
about
two.
now?
Roxy Matafari, she's
Did
had a
she fight
big
on
loss.
Saturday too?
No, but she
Oh,
lost to Maya when Maya didn't make weight, and then she
Mm-hmm.
lost to Sajara Eubanks. Before that, out of her last 3 fights, she lost 2 of them to people who did not make weight, and then went on to bigger fights. And it's got to be frustrating for her to see this person one step from a title shot, even though she again did not make weight, and push Roxy further away from a title because of that. Just something,
Very
just
true.
a side note to it.
And she's made it adamant that she's not moving up in the weight class either. So it'll be interesting to see
She
what's
didn't have
next
the
for
skills
her.
to move weight class. She likes that physical advantage she has, and she's trying to ride it out as long as possible. But I don't know if she's gonna have the option. She misses weight again, she may not have a choice.
True, good point there. Let's talk about UFC Moscow, which is this weekend, and we have only really 2 fights that stood out to me that are worth talking about. And the first one is the beat Maga. I can't look at his name anymore. But I can say it if I see it. But Zabit is fighting Calvin Kattar in the main event. This is the 145-pound affair here, and I've seen some interesting commentary. I think I shared some with you today on Twitter about who we should be watching closely in this fight. What are your thoughts about this battle here, and who you see coming out on top? Is this a foregone conclusion for Zabit, which is kind of how it's being? Whoops. That is this a foregone conclusion for Zabit as how it's being pushed, or should we be paying closer attention to Calvin on Saturday?
I think it's clear that Sabit's being pushed. Sabit's being pushed as this guy who's this technician. He's another foreign fighter. Now we have the reputation of the myth of the foreign fighters, how they're unstoppable. They're such superior technicians. They're machines. They're so dynamic, and they're coming to take over the UFC. He's getting fit along into that category. Bellator started pushing guys like that. The UFC started pushing guys like that. And Zabit, being a foreign fighter who's fought in the ACB, they're using that to build his myth that he's this technically superior, physically superior machine that can't be stopped by lesser fighters. The fact of the matter is, Zabit's a good fighter, not great as far as technique, but because he's fairly good at transitioning between these ranges, or at least he looks like it makes him seem a lot better than he is. He can do some dynamic things, and a lot of times people mistake dynamic ability for actual technical ability. Just like you see a guy with 15 knockouts, he must be a great striker. Not necessarily. He might just be a great athlete, and these guys he's facing aren't athletic enough or durable enough to stand up to whatever he's doing. It doesn't mean he's actually good. It just means he's capable of knocking people out. So beats a guy who has good striking skills, but the dynamic aspect of it, the spinning stuff, the kicks, the kind of creativity and dynamic explosiveness of it makes people think that he's better than he is because he can do these things. But the thing that people often miss out on is that when he starts doing these things is when he runs out of ideas. When plan A isn't working, he doesn't have a plan B that opens doors that can finish a guy or keep him in control, or a plan B that can force you back to his plan A or open up other doors for his plan A to make it more effective. He runs out of ideas, and when he runs out of ideas, he starts throwing spinning back fists, spinning kicks, jumping knees, not because he sees an opening, but because he doesn't have any other idea how to manage the fight or control the fight without throwing something. He doesn't have any sense of how to control it through just positioning, body positioning, feints, and timing. He's got to throw something to create these openings or to take advantage of things, whether there's an opening or not. And that's the biggest problem I have with the beat. He doesn't know how to create openings. There's not enough structure to go from A to E. It's not A B C D E. It's A D C B E. He's all over the place. It's not very structured. He relies heavily on his attributes in in my opinion. And I personally don't think he's physical or durable enough to beat the elite guys. I've never thought that. I believe if he gets to them before they get to him, he might win. If those guys have any sense of durability or conditioning, eventually he might take a round or two off you. But against elite guys, I believe he gets finished against every single one of them. Um, the guy who's Volkanovski, Holloway, Ortega, all those type of guys, I believe they pull away from a guy like that because they have the athletic ability to match him or not be overwhelmed, and they have enough of a developed identity as a fighter to go from plan A to plan B to plan Z back to plan A. They have a structure they can go up and down that provides them legitimate answers to what he's doing. I don't believe he has that. I believe he's working on it, but I don't believe it's established enough that under duress against a guy he can't have his way with, that he can effectively get out of bad spots or keep from being in bad spots. He's just not nearly as gifted as he thinks he is physically, and I don't believe that his skill set, whether striking, grappling, or wrestling, are good enough where he can just dominate the elite level athletes.
So, looking at this fight here, because I don't hear a whole lot about Calvin Kattar coming into this fight. I've seen him fight a couple times, but a lot of people were very impressed. But you don't see a lot of talk about how he's looking coming into this fight here.
They
What do
don't
you
want him to
see?
win. They don't want
What
him.
type of prediction do you have for Saturday's main event?
They don't want Cater to win. Cater is a young guy. He's been exciting. Cater wasn't supposed to beat Ricardo Lamas. They didn't give Ricardo Lamas that fight because they thought he'd lose it. They thought he'd be able to strike into the wrestling exchanges, get Cater down, and win a decision or submit him. That's Ricardo Lamas has made a career out of beating better strikers, better, more athletic strikers or fighters, outsmarting them, making adjustments, getting them down and pounding them out to decisions or getting them down and finishing them. That's been the extent of his career. They're not expecting Cater to win this. That's why they've been pushing Zabit. Cater is the most athletic guy Zabit's faced, in my opinion. Maybe one other guy he's faced is a little bit more athletic, but in my opinion, he's the most skilled guy, especially in regards to the striking. The problem the Cater's going to have is Zabit has his wrestling to fall back on, and that's always going to be an extra layer of defense and an extra layer of offense. So the way I see the fight is going this. I'm thinking the Cater's going to be able to win, but Cater's going to have to use his footwork and he's going to have to use his feints and he's going to have to counter heavily and hard to the body and to the head to Zabit because he's not very good at defending kicks. Zabit's very rangy. He's very athletic. He's kind of creative with his kicks. So Cater's not going to have the luxury of just dancing around. And if he's going to dance around and sit in his boxing stance and really throw, he's going to have to throw. He can't be hesitant. He can't be picking away. He can't be pot shotting. He's got to make sure he's throwing for power, throwing for damage, and throwing in combination to keep the beat off him, to keep him defensively aware of what's coming back at him, and to punish him for any offensive overture he makes towards him. The biggest question he has is can he defend takedowns if the beat starts chaining them together? I don't believe he can. I believe the only way he can defend takedowns is those initial shots, those platonic shots before he gets in deep, where he can sprawl out, pancake him, spin out, or stuff the shot, use his footwork, take an angle, and escape. I don't believe he can get into extended grappling or wrestling exchange and win against the beat. I believe he needs to use his footwork, his feints, to throw off the beat's rhythm, to mess with the distance, and look to counter heavily off of every kick, initially to the body and then eventually to the head. And that's what's going to get him decision, or preferably, I'm thinking he might get a stoppage halfway through the fight. I think Savit's very capable of finishing Cater because his takedown defense isn't really proven, his groundwork isn't really proven. But I think between his footwork, his counters, and his accuracy of his shots and his movement, I think it's going to be really hard for Zabit to get him to the spots he needs to get him to get the takedowns or stay in a control position long enough to get the takedowns he needs to get into without paying a very high price. And I don't have very much faith in Zabit's chin or his cardio when he's not able to have his way and dictate things.
Interesting thoughts there, man. Because I'm really intrigued in this fight, just because a lot of people are looking at Zabit to go in here and get himself a statement win. If he does get that statement win, do you think he's next in line for the winner of Holloway Volkanovski?
Um, Zabit?
Yes.
Um, yeah, they've been trying to push him, so I definitely think he'd be next in line. There's not really anybody available. Ortega hasn't fought in how long? Cub Swanson, that's not happening.
I think
Jeremy,
doesn't Ortega have a fight booked?
yeah, but he's not next up for a title fight. He's far away from it unless Holloway loses the belt. I think what's going to happen is most likely if he beats Cater, there's a good chance they put him in against Yair Rodriguez because they were supposed to fight before, and whoever wins that fight gets the title fight. I believe each one of them needs one more fight. If Zabit beats Cater, that's one legitimate win over a skilled, fairly athletic, proven guy. He beats Yair, that's two wins. Those would be the two best wins of his career. Yair beat Jeremy Stevens, which would still be considered probably the second best win of his career. If he beats Zabit, that'd be like really it's still Jeremy Stevens would still be the second best win. Zabit would be the third, but that'd be three legitimate wins three high-ranking wins all in a row, which would catapult Yair to the title shot. Zabit, if he beats Cater and then beats Yair, that'd be two big wins in a row, which should essentially catapult him to a title shot either way. So, yeah, if he wins this fight, I feel the UFC is going to make Yair versus Zabit.
Okay. All right. And let's talk about Greg Hardy. He's in the co-main event up against Alexander Volkov. And yeah, Volkov should win this fight. He's more experienced. He's more technical. He knows how to get the job done. But to say that Greg Hardy doesn't have a puncher's chance, that's another conversation that's another conversation within it of itself. What are your thoughts about this fight here? And should we put ourselves in a position to be quote unquote surprised?
It's not a matter of does he have a chance. It's not a matter of the question is how does Greg Hardy respond when he's tired and taking abuse? We've seen him when he's winning. We've seen him when he's not able to blow guys out. He doesn't look particularly stand out. He doesn't look particularly courageous. He doesn't look particularly tough. Volkov is a good enough athlete and a balanced enough fighter and good enough striker that he should, in theory, be able to put Greg Hardy in some spots where he's not comfortable with. So we're going to have for Greg Hardy to have a chance to win, he's most likely going to have to show some heart, show some grit that he really hasn't shown in his two or three fights in UFC. When he hasn't been able to clearly dominate somebody, he hasn't looked nearly as fearsome. He hasn't looked nearly as devastating. He hasn't looked nearly as dynamic as he has when he's been able to knock somebody out with one or two shots. And versus Volkov, he's going to have to work. He should, in theory, have to work harder to land shots, work harder to get in position, and take a hell of a lot more punishment than he's ever taken in his life. The thing that makes this fight interesting is that if all things are equal, from what I know about Greg Hardy right now, he's a more athletic, more explosive, more dynamic, but so far seems to be a little bit mentally not as mentally tough nor as physically tough as a Derek Lewis. And Derek Lewis's whole avenue in his fights is he gets beat up, he lands a dynamic bomb, some big shot out of nowhere, and that essentially turns the fight. In theory, Greg Hardy should be able to do that. He's a more explosive guy, he's a better athlete, he's more agile. The question is, can he defend positions? Can he stay away from the key strikes long enough to get to the position he needs to do the work he needs to? I don't believe he can. As poorly skilled as I think Derek Lewis has shown himself to be, he's at least got rounds against world-class opposition. True, it's heavyweights, but it's still world-class opposition, and he's shown enough skill to not be submitted, to not be pounded out, to not be routinely controlled by anybody but the very best guys in division. Greg Hardy's been struggling with guys who aren't even UFC level. And as dynamic as he is, he hasn't shown that devastating one-punch knockout power against anybody who's got a legitimate record or who's won legitimate fights. So while that last-second Hail Mary dynamic athletic knockout should be there in theory, nothing Greg Hardy's shown us in his past 3 or 4 fights has told us that he's going to land that against regional type heavyweights, much less a world class one.
So, I mean, I just really feel like we're going to be in a situation where we get hit with a bad surprise, and everyone's just going to have to sit back and just have to deal with this situation. And if he wins, I think he's getting either Ngannou or Derek Lewis next, and then they're going to try to put him in a position for a title shot. But no one wants this, and there's so many different problematic. Did you see his comments about Derek Lewis today, saying that Derek Lewis is a felon and shouldn't be able to talk about him? Like, this is a bad look for everyone involved, and
it's a bad look. It's a bad look for the UFC. They've created this, they've empowered this, and once again, I don't really even have an opinion on it anymore because I find the lack of consistency with people. Like, if you're going to be this outraged and I'm not saying anybody's fake with their outrage, but if you're going to be this outraged, you're just so disgusted and you want to talk so strongly about this man. It's weird to me because I don't think anybody would have that energy if he was in the same room with them. And my dad's always been told me about consistency.
I mean, yeah, because he can assault you. That's why. Like, that's what, and people may have that same energy,
if somebody
but he can assault you.
if somebody assaulted like somebody you cared about and they were in the same room, even if they could beat you up, you would still say what you had to say. Like that's what separates the people who make those stands. Whether you want to talk about Colin Kaepernick, that's why even people who are bigots or racist or misogynists, when they're obviously and openly about it, do I respect their opinion? No, but I respect the fact that you're saying something that could get you assaulted or turn everybody against you, and you're just saying it because it's what you believe.
That's
You just
totally
don't care.
different. That's totally
But
like that's a totally different comparison
it
because
it is totally different. It is totally different. But I try to like when people say you're very harsh on fighters, Schwann. I've talked to a lot of fighters in person. I've said this to people's faces before. Some people, hey, let's put the gear on. Let me beat your. Okay, fine. We got to do. We got to do it. But I'm not going to adjust what I'm saying because this person's here. I'm just not going to. And it bothers me that so many people are so loud and so he's a coward. He's a punk. He's this. I'm like, dude, I don't. I just don't come from a situation where you talk like people like that unless you're willing to say that to that person. And if you don't approve of it, just say I don't approve of it. I don't agree with it. I don't respect what he's doing because then you could repeat that to his face and there's not a problem. But this whole this that I've never been a fan of it. I just never have. I understand people's outrage, but you're either outraged or you're not. You can't be outraged part of the time and then be change your outrage because now he's right there. You you're outraged. You're outraged. Something's wrong. Is something wrong. If you don't want to feel comfortable saying what you have to say it in a way that you can say it without coming off confrontational. I don't know. That just bothers me. It just bothers me.
it's
But
an interesting situation because like there are so many different issues with this whole matter here. Like the first piece is the fact that the facts behind the matter are that he was convicted of sexual assault, or he was convicted of an assault, and it was overturned because the woman that he assaulted did not come to court, so it was thrown out for whatever reasons that she did not show up. So there's that fact. The other fact on top of that is that the UFC talks about it in a way like they've actively said that this man was not convicted. That is not true. He was convicted, and this is being posed as him. What's the word? As a
it's almost like
as a rebuild.
he's the victim. Like you're
Correct.
not giving him a chance. He's not the victim.
Correct. So there's that situation too. On top of that, then they continuously book him on fight cards where there's women who are survivors of domestic violence. There's that too as well because the
They do
woman.
that on purpose. But they do that on purpose because they're okay with it. They're still fighting on the car. If they're not mad at it, why are you?
But it's because they don't have a choice. And then on top of all that, he's talking about Derek Lewis, who was charged with assault, saying that he's a felon. Derek Lewis went to jail because he beat up a Klan member that threatened him with a shotgun when he was like 17. So that's 110% different than what Greg Hardy was convicted of. So there's like the gall of him to even say that statement is immeasurable. And so when you I look at all those things, it's just like this is just a dirty situation that I understand why people don't want anything to do with it. And it's just yet another matter within the UFC that could be much worse for them if it was covered in the right way. But it's not going
Yeah,
to be covered.
it's true. But
It's not going to be covered that way.
in other sports, people are willing to bite the bullet to make their stand, to make their point. In mixed martial arts, Luke Thomas said it before, people aren't willing to make stands because they want access. If I tick this person off, maybe ATT fighters won't interview with me. If I tick this person on, Dana White's going to pull my credentials. Everybody who's got such disgust and such hate towards this man and hate towards the situation is not willing to put their money where their mouth is. They're not willing to get their credentials pulled permanently to say what they have to say. So I'm like, how strongly can you feel about it? I get it. You have to take care of your family, you have to take care of everything. But if you really feel that strongly, then you have to draw a line in the sand. And if you don't, then you have to find a better way to express what you're feeling because you have a choice. You have an option in how you handle it. And people are choosing to handle it a certain kind of way. I don't agree with the UFC is doing. I don't agree with it at all. They keep saying he's got a second chance. I don't remember that he was ever really punished for this to be a second chance. And
He's
it is
had like
concerning.
3 or 4 chances.
It's concerning to me how many people are so quick to sweep this underneath the rug. I'm all for you move past things, you get past things, you grow on to be a better person. I just haven't seen any contriteness in him. I haven't seen any forgiveness. It's like, in fact, it seems like he's challenging people. Like, you want to see me cry? I'm not going to cry. I'm not built like that. It's just it's a very weird situation, and I don't see how Dana White explains this. But to be honest, he never has to. He just makes an off-cuff comment, and then he sticks his Twitter fans on you, and that's it. He doesn't really have to answer these questions. Greg Hardy doesn't really have to answer any questions. ATT doesn't have to really answer any questions, and I'm not judging them either. They're doing what they feel is best. That's their choice. That's up to them. But if we're going to give heat to the UFC and give heat to Greg Hardy, don't we have to give heat to the camp that's building it, allowing him to have this career?
I mean, yeah, like there's that question as well too. So
You
then
know,
beyond that, do you think he is if he pulls off a win somehow? Do you think he is on the path for a title shot?
I've always said a guy. Everybody keeps on talking about the great athletes in the UFC. You haven't seen a great athlete until you've seen a world class, great non-combat sports athlete. That's where the best. I mean, we have a bunch of 250-pound guys who aren't very quick and agile because they play football or basketball. So we haven't seen the kind of athleticism that Greg Hardy has. And Greg Hardy's actually on the decline. He's not in his prime anymore. But if he could ever develop some sort of a competence and skill set and get some seasoning, I really believe he could be a threat. Not because he's so tough or he's so skilled, but just get enough of a functional skill and a system and approach to fighting that maximizes his athleticism. Because when you see Greg Hardy fight, even though he's a regional heavyweight at best, it's clear that he's one of the best athletes in the UFC right now. You just watch him move, and it's very clear. He doesn't seem to have the cardio for it. He doesn't seem to have the skill to back it up. But just based off athleticism, he's a threat to anybody. I just don't know if there's enough time to get him to be a viable title challenger. Now, if he gets a couple wins, they could put him in a title fight. I just don't know that he can win because he hasn't seemed to be able to do anything past a round and a half. And he has no defense. I don't know what he's like on the ground. There's just so many questions, but they could move him into a title fight if he wins enough fights. And I'm with you. I think they're taking this fight because it's an all or nothing risk. He beats Volkov. He's officially a top 5 heavyweight. It doesn't take much to be a top 5 heavyweight. And then he's a fight or two away from a title shot or a shot against somebody like Derek Lewis. They'd probably make that fight. That'd probably be the next fight for him. Derek
Yeah, I
Lewis
think
would seem like
they would have to do a fight with Derek Lewis.
yeah,
That's
Derek Lewis.
money.
That's a dangerous fight, but it's also a winnable fight given how Derek
Mm-hmm.
Lewis fights. So if he could beat Volkov and Derek Lewis, how do you not give him a title fight? Derek Lewis challenged for a heavyweight title less than a year ago. So he beat two guys who were one guy who was a step away from a title shot, one guy who got one, and he beat him. If he beats them both, it's going to be hard not to give him a title fight. I mean, seriously speaking, how could you deny him one?
Yeah,
I
how
just
could
don't
you
think he's
deny
good
one?
enough. I think he's got the athleticism. I don't know what he's good enough at to beat any heavyweight who's really a threat at heavyweight. Stipe Miocic, how does he beat him? Even Francis Ngannou, how does he really beat him? I don't
That's a good
know.
point there. That's a good point. Let's also talk about. I want to move on to Bellator 233, which is on Friday. Friday. Is there anything on this card that stands out to you? King Mo's retirement fight. He's 21-9. He's stepping into the cage for last time. Leslie Smith is on this card. John Salter, I'm a kind of a fan of him. He's pretty interesting to me. And Logan Storley is also fighting as well. So Jordan Young, he's also another undefeated prospect. Is there anything on this card that stands out to you that's worth really kind of commenting on?
The biggest thing that I was looking forward to is seeing the last fight for King Mo. As people know, is a good friend of mine. Kind of got me into the whole aspect of helping fighters, trying to come up with game plans and stuff. So he's
I
the
don't know
first guy to let me.
what's that sound in the background, man. You got to get away from that.
It's one of my kids chopping ice in the freezer. Let me move.
Okay. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
he was one of the guys who got. Okay. He's one of the guys who got me my start into mixed martial arts, like as far as like not actually training, but helping fighters. And he was one of my biggest proponents. Like even now, he's still trying to get me to move to Florida so I can start coaching guys. Like he's always texting me about that. That was the biggest thing, just to see. Hopefully, he goes out on a win because he's a fighter who I don't think people are really going to appreciate how good he was or how much he overcame in his fights, win or lose. Like there were some times where I knew about serious injuries. Yeah, like serious injuries. He's going into fights, not even not even 60%, not even 55% going into fights and maybe not winning, but competing against guys who are the best in his weight division. And, me being friends with him, I'm not going to say anything about it. And he doesn't want people making excuses for him. I mean, I know the real reason he couldn't get that takedown. I know the reason his hands were a little bit slow, but he doesn't like making excuses. I fight, I win, I lose, I go about my business. And so it sucked the past couple of years watching him not be able to be at 100% and do the things that I know he's capable of doing. So the biggest thing for me is just seeing him go out on a win, hopefully, and maybe in retirement he'll get some of that respect and appreciation that people didn't really ever give him. Even after his Risen win, making the two Bellator finals, he was a Strikeforce champion. Like people just never seemed to warm up to him or respect what he did or appreciate the skill set he's shown. And he's a real stand up dude. Like he helps people money, he helps people training. He's just a real stand up guy, and I kind of feel bad that people will never get to know the King Mo that I know. I can tell people about him, but people will never get to know the King Mo that I know, and it sucks that he's never going to get his props for what he's done because he's had a very good career by all measures. He's had a really good career as a mixed martial artist, and he's probably just never going to get it because he refused to play the game the way it should be played or the way other people play it. And I respect him for that, but it just sucks because I think he deserves better from the mixed martial arts media, the fans, and the fighters themselves.
What is King Mo's legacy, seeing how he's never competed in the UFC? He's competed just about everywhere else. I mean, literally everywhere else where the industry allows. So looking at his, he's held titles, he's lost title fights, he's been upset, he's done upsetting. I mean, he has that big win over Gegard Mousasi years ago.
Or the
What
win
is,
over the Risen tournament. Nobody expected him to win that one.
yeah, that too. Like, what is his legacy as a fighter?
Probably somebody who they never got to see in the UFC, so people are always going to kind of question where he's at. He was always considered because the UFC's light heavyweight division was never great. He was always considered a top 10 light heavyweight. At one point, he was probably considered one of like a top 5 light heavyweight. So he's going to be a guy who people he's going to be considered a good fighter who was never considered great because he was never able to face his contemporaries, or in most people's opinion he was never able to win the big fight when it was needed. The first loss against Rampage, which I didn't think he lost that fight, the fight against Phil Davis, the Ryan Bader fight, people are going to point to those as examples that he was never really elite because when facing guys from the UFC he didn't win enough time for them to be considered elite. But in my opinion, at points in his career, he was elite, and at some point could have made an argument that he was the best light heavyweight in the world at one point. And he was always, for the large part of his career, probably in top 10, if not top 7, if you just look at what he's accomplished. But the main thing he's going to be known for is the fact that he fought over multiple weight classes, and he fought whoever there would be to fight. He's fought a who's who of guys at heavyweight and light heavyweight. He's never shied away from a challenge. He's never been unwilling to fight in any organization, whether it's in America or Japan or other countries. He's fought all over the globe. And I think he's going to be known as an old school fighter who took on every challenge available and fought the best of the best throughout his career. He won some, he lost some, but he was always willing to fight the best people available at any given time, regardless of what it might do to him financially or the risk it might take in fighting somebody. He was always one of the best guys. He won at Ryan Bader in the heavyweight matchup. He won at Phil Davis when Phil Davis was on the win streak. He won at these guys because he wanted to prove that he was the best, and he wanted people to acknowledge that he was the best. So that kind of that push and that desire to be the best and that willingness to take fights anywhere, anytime against anyone, Donald Cerrone gets a lot of respect for that. People don't give King Mo that same respect for doing the very same thing that Donald Cerrone's done for years, and he's always been willing to do that. And people just never respect it because they don't know what he's gone through. And just one side note, I always tell people this about King Mo. This is how good a dude he is because when he's over in Japan, he asked me to write up these breakdowns of these guys in between fights. He's texting me, like, WhatsApping me, like, what should I do in this fight? What should I do in that fight? I mean, he knows what to do, but he's just looking for an outside opinion. He respects mine. So, like, I fall asleep, right? And I was pretty sure I fell asleep. I was staying up to win that, to find who won the Risen tournament, but I fell asleep. Wake up in the morning, I get these messages from King Mo, and it's like, he did it, he won all this other stuff. And then he made this video on YouTube where he's talking about the people who helped him get ready for the fight. And he mentions, he's like, my boy Schwann from San Antonio. That's how I used to be known on Sherdog when I used to call in. And it was crazy to me because it's the first time I'd helped somebody and they actually like acknowledge me. Like I sent it to my mom, sent it to like everybody. People were like, "Oh my God, King Mo shouted you out and everything." And so then later in that day, King Mo contacted me, and he was like, "I was like, hell man, congratulations on the win. You did a great job." And this is how good a dude he is. He didn't say, he goes, "No, no, no. Don't congratulate me on the win. Congratulate us. We won this title. We did this together, and I appreciate all your help." And I feel like I helped him, but he didn't have to say that, dude. He's like, at that time, he's a world class fighter, top 10, top 7, top 5 light heavyweight. He just won one of the biggest tournaments where nobody bet on him at all. He beat young up and comers, and in his big moment, he's bigging me up and putting my name out there and talking about me on other shows and telling me how much he appreciates my help and how he couldn't do it without me. I don't know if that's true or not, but he didn't have to say that. And that's the kind of guy he is. And people will never know how hard he fought through all these injuries to make sure he put on the show and competed against the best guys in the world, never being 100%. I'm not talking about close to 100%. I'm talking about probably should not be fighting, but still got in there and did what he had to do because that's the kind of guy he is. He's like he's into boxing. He's like an old school boxer. You just tell me where, let me put my gloves on, we're gonna see what's up. And that's what he's always done. And I hope people remember him as a guy who fought anybody who wanted to fight him. Big name, little name, small name, elite fighter, lower class fighter. Whoever wanted it with King Mo got it with King Mo. It was never an issue with King Mo, and I hope people respect that about him.
True, true. That's a pretty touching story there, man. That's a pretty in-depth look at the way, even someone who is just I don't want to say a fan, but someone who is an outside observer can have an impact on these fighters, which is one thing that makes MMA much more personable than other sports. Is that LeBron wouldn't reach out and have that conversation with a fan. Bryce Harper wouldn't have that conversation with a fan. But when it comes to MMA, these guys are more frequently available to kind of have these conversations and more open to it. That's like like Gerald Harris. He and I go back and forth quite often on Twitter. So yeah, it is a space where it's much more open to those types of conversations.
Yeah, one last thing. King Mo has a great memory because we used to go back and forth. That's how we met. We're watching boxing fight, and I was breaking it down. He's like, "This dude's about to get finished," and I was like, "Nah, this dude's about to knock this dude out." So he knocks him out, and I'm just, berating him on Twitter, like, "I got you, whatever." And years ago, he told me Justin Gaethje would get cleaned up by Dustin Poirier. I was like, "There's no way Gaethje's walking straight through him." As soon as Gaethje knocks out Poirier, you know, my phone's blowing up. What did I tell you all those years ago? Did I tell you he was gonna get like, yeah, man, you told me, all right. Good, glad to hear it. And every time somebody he told me would win a fight, lost it, I'm on King Mo's ass. Like, what'd you say, dude? You supposed to be a fighter. You supposed to know this stuff. I'm just a fan, dude. How am I making better picks than the actual fighter? He's just a great dude. Great dude. My kids love him too. They talk to him all the time. They love him to death.
That's what's up, man. That's good stuff to hear there, sir. I wanted to touch on the Canelo and Kovalev fight on Saturday. What were some of your thoughts there?
It was a good fight. Unfortunately, it seems like Canelo's turning into Mayweather. He's picking tough matchups, but he's picking them at a time where they're not as difficult as they might have been a year or two ago. Kovalev had just, like, less than 6 months ago, had a vicious beating put on him by a guy in a title offense. Before that, he had a comeback win over a guy who had knocked him out about a year ago. Kovalev hadn't looked as intimidating or dangerous or durable as he had been early in his career. So when Canelo picked this fight, less than 6 months after he took a huge, tremendous beating, it was for a reason. He saw some chinks in Kovalev's armor. He saw these slowing down. He saw they didn't have as much faith in his durability anymore. I'm going to go after this guy. Now, it was still a dangerous fight. Kovalev can still punch. Kovalev can box. But it was a fight that Canelo picked because it wasn't as big a threat as any other option at the light heavyweight division. So he wanted kind of I don't want to say a sure thing because there's never a sure thing in a fight, but the closest thing to a sure thing in a fight when he picked that fight with Kovalev. And it was a good fight. Actually, if he did knock Kovalev out, Kovalev probably would have won the fight, but been robbed by decision, to be quite honest. The fact that Canelo closed the fight out by knocking him out is what allowed us to get over the fact that Kovalev was most likely going to be robbed. It was a close fight, but Kovalev was sticking the jab, moving, not allowing Canelo to put combinations together. And in my opinion, he was outpointing him. He would have had an argument for a win. There was no way he was going to get the decision, of course. But Canelo took all the out of the judges' hands by finishing him and get probably one of the best knockouts I've seen in the past 5 to 10 years. That was quite a knockout, and I did not expect that. I expected Canelo to get him to the body and maybe finishing him that way. I didn't expect him to land that clean and put him away like that. Kovalev looked done. I mean, like there was a good chance I thought he might have been severely hurt when he actually got back to his feet and spoke after the fight. I was shocked because I thought he was out. I thought he was going to have to go directly to the hospital the way he fell up against those ropes.
Yeah, it was a hell of a finish, and I was actually kind of surprised that it went down that way. We have a question from a listener that actually kind of ties into the Kovalev fight here. Was this fight a crossover moment for MMA and boxing? We saw all the videos of people watching Diaz and Masvidal as they were waiting for the main event for Canelo and Kovalev. Do you think this was a crossover moment, or is it just like a distraction that boxing fans were kind of forced to watch as they waited for the main event?
If this is a crossover moment, then Matt Hughes watching the Floyd Mayweather fight when the tough finale is going on is a crossover moment. It is crossover just for the fact that I've never heard of I've never heard of another sporting event pushing their event back to avoid competition with another event. Canelo's like, he's supposed to be the cash cow. He's supposed to be one of the biggest, most well-known combat sports athletes in the world. And he's putting off a record-breaking title fight because a fake title fight in the UFC is going on. It seems a little weird. It almost seems like you would think boxing is conceding to the mixed martial arts that because they're holding their main event back. The only difference is this is the zone, and they're holding its subscriptions, and they want to get as many subscriptions and as many people watching it as possible. So my only thought process is they're thinking, instead of us going against the UFC and losing out on some viewers, let's let that fight in, and then we'll put our fight on after so that we can maximize the eyes watching this, because their whole thing is like Netflix or Hulu or ESPN, it's subscriptions, it's subscribers. They don't want to risk losing any subscribers or any potential people who are just signing up for that fight by going head-to-head with the UFC. The UFC clearly didn't care. But once again, now that they're behind that paywall, the UFC doesn't have to justify anything. Canelo Alvarez got a $350 million deal. There are certain numbers that have to be hit to justify that salary. So they were trying to clear all the decks to make sure that Canelo got as many eyes as possible on him, as many subscriptions as possible on him, to make the money they spent paying him that contract to fight in the zone.
True. So with that in mind, man, let's go ahead and let everybody know what you're working on this weekend before we close out.
Working on the camp stuff in the midst of the Green Arrow stuff. See if we can get that knocked out in the next week or so. I hope to have an article coming out in the next week and then going from there.
True. I'm covering pro wrestling as usual this week. There's a lot of stuff going on this weekend I'm kind of at a loss for. Me and Luke Thomas may be doing a watch party for Logan Paul versus KSI 2. So we may be working on that. Keep an eye out on Twitter to let you know if that's going down. But outside of that, man, we're going to go. Yeah, I know it's going to break the internet. It's going to be the greatest collaboration of all time, like I always said. We're going to go ahead and close out this week's show. We've gone for an hour and a half, kind of long tonight, but we have a lot to talk about. Let's go ahead and close out. Thank you, everybody, for checking us out today. We will be back next week. Next week, we'll talk about a programming note for holidays and all that good stuff. But yeah, man, have a great weekend, and thanks again for always being on the show.
You too. Appreciate it, man. Everybody stay safe out there.